Howdy! Guess who's back? Been a minute, hasn't it? Anyway, Hazbin Hotel Season 2. Now listen here, I am fully of the opinion that Hazbin Hotel was and is still overhated. Not because the show is good by any means. I mean, ha! You saw the title. I'm about to tear what is at the moment its thesis to pieces. But because a lot of popular reasons cited for the show being bad, there's too much swearing, it's too lewd, the creator is cringe, it's not biblically accurate, are, in this puddle of fabric's opinion, poor critiques of Hazbin's quality. Styles of humor and levels of vulgarity are issues of personal taste. Concerning the creator and petty fandom drama, those are, at least here in the land of Fabric Boy, inconsequential to whether or not the show is actually well written. Though I won't deny you the right to have such squabbling inform one's own attitude toward the show. It sure has mine. As for biblical accuracy, it's pronounced allegory. Grow up! I am firmly of the belief that if you're going to hate something, you should have the integrity to hate it for the right reasons. If it's not personally to your liking, don't watch it. That's totally fine. But don't invent shallow excuses to try and place your personal tastes as objective markers of media quality. And for goddess's sake, it's not a biblical retelling. Stop being weird. That being said, Hazbin Hotel, with the release of Season 2, has, in my opinion at least, jumped into "this is a very poorly written story" territory. And I do not make such declarations lightly. Now, while yes, I still have some vestigial goodwill toward this story that's been important to me for years. Oh my god. And yes, I do believe that there are a couple gems in Season 2 that could be expanded upon in Season 3. As a whole, boy howdy, this show is pretty cooked. While I found Season 1 to be an inspired piece of media that really hooked me when I first saw it, its flaws were pretty glaring. For every poison and you didn't know, and plenty of other pieces of greatness not confined to musical numbers. There were enough instances of mind-boggling pacing and the occasional "why?" thrown in to put Season 1 as being a solidly average story in my mind. One that, for all its highs and instances of holy peak, was held back by a myriad of issues which, for me, were overlookable for the time being. And with the coming of Season 2, there was an opportunity to keep all the solid character writing, themes, and interesting world building, while also writing a season that paced its events more coherently and was more efficient with how it used its time. Now, while I could write a 9-hour video essay about why Season 2 as a whole, to put it mildly, did not do that, y'all know what the title of this video is, so enough preamble. Let's jump into why Hear My Hope is the pure distillation of why Hazbin Season 2 shattered the themes of Hazbin Hotel. Oh, and there are also just some plot elements here that are really dumb. Who would have thought? Side note before we jump in, I'm not at all an expert or even mildly educated on the composition of musical numbers, so we're going to be focusing on why Hear My Hope sucks on a storytelling and thematic level as opposed to a musical one. Honestly, if you strip away all of the nonsensical decisions and story and thematic problems, I find the song to be a bit of a bop, but that's the only nice thing you'll get out of me about this song. Well, one of them. Lego!
Part 1. The Themes of Hazbin. Alrighty, so before we get into the nitty-gritty details here, let's establish the parameters of what we're going to be yapping about for the next, I don't know, how long is this video? So, what is Hazbin Hotel about? If you said the struggle by the daughter of Lucifer to run a hotel to rehabilitate sinful humans to raise them up to heaven, then you'd be frickin' wrong. No, my dear viewer, Hazbin Hotel, when you really dig into it, is in no way a tale of angels and demons, radio and TV, but rather a story about progress, revolution, and oppression. If you strip away all the fights, sex, magic, and fantastical incidents, you end up with a story that is fundamentally about how abuse and oppression are perpetrated and resisted. And it is this theme that the song which Season 2 closes on utterly bungles in such a specific way that it serves as a perfect representative of how the season as a whole failed its themes. So keep that whole spiel in your mind going forward, and let's get into it.
Part 2. Emily. But not really.
Hear my hope.
Stop the tapes! Ah, yes. We're not even one line into the song, and I already have problems. Because of how if I were to go down the rabbit hole of why Emily is so disappointing in this scene, and how that disappointment is the reverberation of a failed plot point this season, we would kind of deviate considerably from our little video premise. I'm going to ask y'all to put a little pin in this scene, and Emily in general, so we can come back to it and her after I cover my other grievances, and set the stage for why I don't like this. It all sort of acts as a nice little focal point of how the problems with this stupid song are reflective of why Season 2 is such a disaster. Suffice to say, for now, just remember that Emily stepping up to start the song while still being a seraphim angel with her shiny little tiara and having Sarah be not estranged from her is problematic from a thematic perspective. Now, onward to Misogyny Isle! Part 3. Have no fear, misogyny is here to save the day. So, the first little bit of the song I actually don't have too much of an issue with. The message in Isolation that, yes, we do need to fight, even if it doesn't seem like our tiny contributions are doing anything, is, in my opinion, quite good. Especially in times like our own. In the irony-poisoned, doomer-infested wastelands that are many modern human brains, I think it's very relevant, especially to current events, that even if we are only a few people, only little specks in the vast ocean of humanity, we should stand up and fight for what we believe in, for what is right, for what is necessary to avoid catastrophe. If nobody fights, who will? The little progression of just Emily, then Charlie, then Husk, then the others joining in is quite neat, and a good little display of why fighting for what you believe in is important. The reason why resisting is important. When you resist, you inspire others to join you, and they bring others with them who bring others as well, until... The main issue I see here is that it's only the angels, princesses, and overlords who are actively contributing their energy to generate the barrier. The ones who are able to contribute their energy to generate the barrier, that have the power to, affect change. All of the, for lack of a better word, common folk, specifically by the end, are a considerable minority in terms of those who are in the circle and contribute nothing but seemingly moral support to the people who actually have power. Thematically, this could be worse, because it is, once we get further into the song. Even here, it's still not great, though. The idea that resistance against oppression and calamity is carried out by a few people who already have power, who then proceed to inspire commoners, which contribute no actual assistance beyond moral support, before eventually other powerful aristocrats step in to save the day, is rough. And I'm also getting ahead of myself, so put a pin in that for later. I'm sure it'll be fine. I think it would have been great if in this scene, and also throughout the song, Angel Dust, Vaggie, the fish, they were all contributing their own, albeit considerably smaller amounts of power to generate the shield. And in doing so, all these little guys who are watching in the crowd, all these average Joes, eventually get inspired not by the intervention of the aristocracy, but by their fellows to contribute their own small bits of power as well, which, altogether, are what actually make the difference when it comes to containing the explosion of the might of Lilith. But again, I'm getting ahead of myself, so put a pin in that too, and we're moving on to everyone's favorite part of the song, Lute solo. Yay. Okay, we're getting this out of the way. Lute was not treated well this season. I don't care if she's gonna do her thing in season 3, the time to act on what was set up for her character in Gravity was season 2, and it wasn't, so it's bad. Even if season 3 does the coolest story with Lute that it can, which I'm not holding out hope for, that won't change that for an entire season where Lute was seemingly, by all the axioms of storytelling, set up to do literally anything, did nothing. Whatever she does in season 3 can be as awesome as the Battle of Helm's Deep, or whichever other cinematic thing you personally enjoy. But good stuff later just does not change bad stuff now. But anywho, what I personally mislike about the scene above all else is not actually super Lute-centric, but Abel-centric. Or rather, how something that is Abel-centric affects things that are Lute-centric. Okay, let's get into this. Yes. Abel, the tertiary character who in the literal final minutes of the last frickin' episode we're gonna try to force a weird conclusion to a character arc that wasn't set up earlier in the season, beyond Abel being a consistently ineffective leader and the butt of some jokes. And best of all, we're gonna give him the weirdest possible win we can manage. So let's break this down, shall we? Lute is, for all her wickedness, as much a victim of Adam as Vaggie. In her character is, or was, an exploration of an aspect of misogyny and abuse distinct from that which was perpetrated on Vaggie, and I guess the other exorcists. Adam, who is a sexist, created the exorcists and inflicted upon them all the varying disrespects and abuses he felt he had the right to perpetrate on women as a demographic. Lute is, in my view, a bit of a tragic character. She is in love with a man who fundamentally never saw her as an equal, maybe not even a person, merely a tool. It's literally in her name. She is nothing more in his mind than his lieutenant, his assistant. Even so, we see that Lute clung to how Adam treated her with a bit more personhood, treating her like one of the guys in season 1.
275? Whoa! Badass! Awesome job, Danger Tits. Pound it!
Something that is a fundamentally misogynistic act by Adam, by the way. And his death does utterly devastate her. We see in her hallucinations of Adam that the man she was devoted to was more so the idea of Adam as a guiding, benevolent overlord than the actual man himself, a version of Adam that never existed beyond a fantasy in Lute's head that Adam would eventually support her, that, again, never actually existed. I truly think that these scenes are pretty illuminating. Most of the supportive stuff Adam says in these scenes are things he would, A, never say in real life, and B, all he really does is repeat back to Lute her own thoughts and desires, just flavored as him being the one to suggest such things and Lute complying with them. She doesn't actually have experiences to base this hallucination off of, where Adam would treat her as a person and actually encourage her beyond just giving her the go-ahead to follow through on what she wants. And so when she imagines a version of Adam that does do that, it's the most bare-bones stuff imaginable. Despite Lute's villainy, and she is still evil, remember, ultimately this is an unwell woman who literally cannot fathom acting on her own unless Adam tells her to do so, to the point where she needs to hallucinate him in order to act on her own desires. She's still chained to this man even after his death, and is unable to figure out what to do with her life outside of just following through with continuing Adam's legacy of bloodshed and carnage. It's also important to mention that in Season 2, we see other examples of Heaven indulging in, let's call it, patriarchal-adjacent actions, with Abel, an utterly unqualified man-child Nepo baby, being promoted to head of the exorcists above the mental instability that no one in Heaven seems to notice or care about aside, much more qualified Lute, who just so happens to be, a woman. Even if this was just an instance of Heaven's BS meritocracy and indulgence in nepotism, it's still a moment that is at the barest minimum quite applicable to real-world instances within patriarchal systems. Now that we've got our little parameters established, Lute is fundamentally a person who has been victimized by both a misogynist and a patriarchal system, we can actually get into the scene and hear my hope. So, Lute's about to, assumedly, kill Vaggie, and Abel, in the span of literal seconds, again, I can't stress enough how rushed this character arc is, and how much of a demonstration it is that the showrunners have absolutely no idea how to use their time responsibly, decides to get a grip and grow a pair, which I think are meant to be statements of how Abel is going to stand up for himself and take charge, but kind of sound more like him hyping himself up with a fundamentally unhealthy coping mechanism so he can embody his father's toxic masculinity, and he charges Lute and steps in her way to stop her from committing, murder. But, my God, why does he do it this way?
Bitch, you better fall back.
It's time for the etymology of swears. In all seriousness, we're going to be digging into some systemic misogyny and exploring the nature of how women have been / are dehumanized and stuff, so if you don't want to engage in that, feel free to skip ahead. The slur of bitch occupies an interesting area in our culture. It's tossed around plenty in a lot of spaces, but also regarded by plenty as something that's kinda really derogatory. Specific to our circumstances, Abel using bitch as a derogatory against a woman, even though he is in the right, is, really damn gross, especially in these circumstances. Calling a woman a bitch when you're a man like Abel, who already holds a position of power in a patriarchal system, in the context of conflict, sends a message even if you don't mean it to. By calling her a bitch, you're saying that fundamentally, because of her gender, something she has no control over, she is beneath you, and therefore you are in the right. Its origins as a term for female dogs is even more problematic when you think about it within the context of sex. By attacking a woman in this way, you're saying that she is beneath you not only because of who she is in the social hierarchy, but because of her place in the sexual hierarchy. Calling a woman a bitch to make her back down is dehumanizing, it's degrading. When a man calls a woman a bitch, he's asserting that she needs to remember her position as being beneath him, that she does not have the same autonomy he does, both sexually and socially, and therefore, he wins. This is why Abel's "bitch, get back in line" would be a bit rough under the best of circumstances, but for some unfathomable reason, it's framed in the actually worst way possible, with Abel stepping into Adam's shadow / role, which is absolutely not a win. Why on earth should we be thanking the gods for the fact that the son of an exploitative, harassing, potential sexual assaulter who has only achieved power due to Nepo baby status is using the same abusive tactics as his father to retain his authority just because he's using them to put the bad woman in her place? Part of being principled about, those human rights and stuff and equality for all is that those positions apply to everybody. The precedent that we get to pick and choose who is and who is not bad enough to be called a bitch and dehumanized is dumb and bad and a horrible idea. You'll never guess it, but most abusive people think their victims deserve it. What makes this scene between Abel and Lute so unacceptable is that for all intents and purposes, Abel has all the power here. This is not a situation where power is balanced. Abel is Lute's superior. He is the son of the man who created Lute and who she worshipped. He has the backing of all of Heaven's political and military might. He doesn't need to be invoking such an abusive tactic on someone who is already psychologically damaged by abuse rooted in misogyny, and yet he is still pushing Lute deeper into the dirt by basically saying to her that no matter what she thinks, simply by being a woman, she has to obey him. Now, I'm not saying Lute shouldn't have been stopped. Murder and genocide are bad, but stories don't exist in vacuums. How characters choose to fight is as important as why they fight, because the audience is going to, subconsciously or no, be taking messages from what they are seeing. And the message, well, as long as you're stepping into the shoes of your genocidal sex predator father to dehumanize into submission the bad woman, it's okay. Is this what the writers intended? Hell if I know. I'd say probably not, given what the show is supposed to be about, but these are the messages you end up with, since bad writing usually leads to a failure to be firm in messaging and convictions, as well as just sorta failing to think things through. Think, Mark! Part 4. Be not afraid. The rich people will save us. This is the part of Hear My Hope that actually just fills me to the brim with combustive rage. You see, outside of the Helliverse, in the real world, there are these things called billionaires, CEOs, oligarchs, the people with social and economic power. And as we all know, we can always count on those people to, without a fault, do the right thing. That's why we've never needed labor laws or permits or building restrictions, because it's not like in a dog-eat-dog world those in power will literally burn the world to ensure the eternal filling of their wallets with more money than they could ever hope to spend in their lifetimes. The Overlords stepping in is just stupid. I don't care how cool they look or how, yeah, they're in danger too. From a thematic perspective, the Overlords aren't the good guys who should be running to help. Yes, they are sinners, but they are the sinners who have amassed obscene levels of power. They are, as we see with the V's, pretty much able to disconnect from any of the suffering of the sinners in hell. Even when the slaughter of sinners is climbing in season 1, Carmine frames the issue not as a humanitarian concern or even a concern for their own personal safety, but rather as a problem for their power and standing and authority that needs to be addressed to protect their interests. The Overlords are, as far as the sinners are concerned, because the nobility of hell don't seem to do anything in the Pride Ring, the ruling class just beneath the power of heaven. They are, for all intents and purposes, not even in the same thematic category as sinners. Like the ruling class of our own world, the Overlords only give a thought to things that affect them and their political/economic interests, or help them along their own personal paths. And everyone else can either sign their soul away to serve for all eternity, or burn to the ground. They are fundamentally oppressive and disconnected from their fellow sinners. I honestly think Carmine is a pretty good encapsulation of how Overlords parallel real-world oligarchs at the best of times. She is a ruthless arms dealer who is willing to fuel wanton slaughter to gain power and resources, and only takes any action that might benefit others when it concerns her personally. No, I don't care that she loves her daughters. The power of love doesn't excuse you from committing acts of unspeakable evil. She is so short-sighted that she fails to consider that, yes, if she doesn't take a stand, she gon' die, having failed to do the math that just because she has placed herself and her personal circle in a comfortable little box above the rest of the sinners, heaven isn't gonna care and slaughter them all anyway, all while having no further considerations for the actions she takes, which affect millions beyond her own personal issues. The price of power is one's own humanity. When the decisions of the few affect the fate of millions, you are going to end up with incalculable suffering, because a few who are in power purely for their own goals and are totally unchecked will never be able to account for all the many who are beneath them because they simply don't care. It might seem like I'm coming down particularly hard on Carmine here, but the same is true of all the other Overlords, and I'd say out of all of them, we've seen the least awful out of her. Not one has acted out of any brand of desire more complicated than the advancement of their own agenda. The suffering of their fellow sinners is entertainment, in spite of the fact that all which distinguishes them from the millions they exploit and oppress is a veil of power ultimately inconsequential to the forces of heaven, aka that big existential threat. Even when they do move to, big air quotes, help, it's for purely selfish reasons, for their own personal pleasures and boons from heavenly conquest, not protecting their people from further slaughter. Thematically, the Overlords cannot be participants in the ritual to stop the big boom. They are pretty much entirely antithetical to the supposed message of the song. They literally own multiple participants of the OG crew that started this. But Rocco, what else should they have done? They were gonna die. Well, you see, given that no Overlords have been granted character progress to redeem them from the position that they only care about themselves and their own interests, which is where they start at, Carmine is only stepping in early because, again, she feels like this might affect her. But still, if you feel like that's enough to allow her to stay and help, that's fine. But even if you feel like that's enough to allow her to stay and help, the rest of the Overlords who have, again, shown no interest in helping anyone but themselves should have run like the selfish wretches they have shown themselves to be. You could literally do anything with them except place them as being the key to success when stopping the explosion. What is the message here? That we can act without the slightest bit of care for the lives of our fellow humans and push ourselves to the brink of annihilation because the rich will save us all in the end because the issue is finally affecting them? This is a loss for hell in the long term. Destruction was averted, yes, but absolutely no systemic change was achieved beyond knocking out the crazy guy who was gonna accidentally blow up the city. Further ruin is predicated on the idea that overlords, these sadistic, exploitative monsters who literally by their own admission own millions of slaves, will, when push comes to shove, aka when they are personally effective, stop in to just barely avert the disaster that they caused. None of them face consequences. None of them. When a system is fundamentally rotten, you need to fight against the rot if you want long-term stability, not learn to work with it. If, hypothetically, all the overlords in the show got a redemption arc while the political system of hell remained the same, and that is a gargantuan if, what's stopping later down the line other overlords rising to positions of unchecked power who are as bad if not worse than their predecessors? In the real world, our own powerful and wealthy are so detached from the horrors they caused that they happily continue to poison the planet, deny people basic necessities, and start wars for their own selfish interests because they don't think that they will ever be personally affected. When you're trying to make progress against an oppressive system, promoting the path the people in charge of the system will eventually make the right call, in the end isn't just naive, it's propaganda for the oppressive system itself. The system wants you to think it will change its mind because it doesn't want you to realize it's going to keep abusing you and wants to waste your time and effort on inconsequential forms of resistance.
So, we're never fucking talking about this shit ever again, right?
Yeah, no, I'm gonna go with no.
Yes, ZZ, I'm sure it suits you very nicely that we never mentioned that one time you and your fellow short-sighted aristocrats nearly enabled the annihilation of millions and only just barely managed to undo that damage in a desperate scramble combined with pure luck. I'm sure your power will be nice and secure and people won't think that maybe the system you benefit from isn't the correct one and choose to rise up, and your ego can be nicely shielded from any level of self-reflection. They have literally learned nothing. In real life, counting on oppressors to finally make the right call is stupid. You know why? Because those who they oppress most likely will already have suffered untold horrors by the time they come around. If we want to reduce suffering, death, or whatever, that strategy is not worthwhile. Those who think they are safe and happy above the carnage protected by their power and status cannot be counted on to make the right decision until they are affected personally by the issue. Sure, every now and then we have someone like Emily, an aristocrat with a strong moral compass, who would absolutely be willing to go against the grain of the oppressive system she's part of to the point of relinquishing her original status to follow her more, oh hey, it's Emily time, but not yet, cause WTF, I genuinely can't believe writing can be this tone deaf. You have a villain who represents a certain evil ideology, they and their ideology need to lose. Valentino, the rapist, exploitative, murdering slaver, and Velvet, the vain best buddy of all that stuff, who has also been an exploitative, murdering slaver who brews rape potions on the side, should not be here. What does this accomplish? What message are we sending? Neither of these psychos have shown any remorse. They have all the same problems as the other overlords in terms of not belonging in this circle thematically, except we've actually been given a glimpse into how evil these specific people are. Velvet, the woman who brews potions that are literally used for unspeakable acts of sexual violence, who represents the blood-sucking evils of social media platforms who exploit fake connection for clicks and power, and Valentino, who is just a decently accurate depiction of a sexual exploiter who is guilty of all the sins you could associate with that occupation, and is the embodied horrors of what we allow to be perpetrated on those in the sex industry through our lack of empathy to those we as a society have dehumanized. They are not good guys. Why is Valentino singing alongside his victim as part of what seems like a joke? I can't tell. This show is so good. Part 5. Emily. Actually, I promise, I swear. Emily was by far one of my favorite season 1 characters. As I said, Hazbin Hotel is a story about oppression and abuse and resistance and explores those themes in several ways, but one of the most compelling to me personally was the religious angle season 1 tackled. Emily and Sarah in season 1 are representatives of two distinct yet equally important aspects of religion as a mechanism for abuse and control. With Emily, we see what oppressive religions often say they are about, what they could/should be by their own definitions, uncomplicated love, compassion, mercy, forgiveness, etc. And with Sarah, we see what an oppressive religious system is actually concerned with, that being maintaining power by any means necessary while shielding criticism with a veil of righteousness. One of my favorite scenes in season 1, possibly just my favorite scene in the whole show now that we have season 2 as a comparison, is the trial. Specifically the scenes between Emily and Sarah before and after the revelation that the exterminations are being committed against the populace of hell. Emily is, as we've seen earlier, what an angel is supposed to be, according to Heaven's actual ideology. She doesn't care about what is politically expedient for Heaven or what is kind to her sister's ego. She is genuinely invested in the well-being of all mortal souls because that's part of Heaven's precepts. Kindness, benevolence, etc. All of this Emily genuinely believes in, so she's actually intrigued at the idea that maybe sinners don't need to be punished in hell. All the while, of course, while Emily is trying to engage in Charlie's idea of redemption in good faith, Sarah has already made her decision. Gee, here in this scene we get a textbook example of that thing I mentioned earlier, about how oppressive systems will pretend to engage with those who resist them on their own predetermined terms while having already come to their own decisions, for the purpose of wasting the time of those who resist them and maintain the appearance that, no, we're totally open to changing. You just gotta convince me. Gee, isn't it crazy how the show was actually really compelling originally? Where was I? Oh, right, Sarah being severely morally compromised in season 1. She made her decision about sinners years ago when she agreed to the exterminations. It's not about the precepts of Heaven. It's barely even about Heaven or the souls that reside there. It's about what's most politically advantageous for the power structure Sarah is embedded in. Hell, there's even that instance in You Didn't Know that seems to kinda imply that Sarah is maybe just a bit of a sadistic monster who's lost all track of her moral compass and just enjoys hurting sinners. Huh? Where'd that go, guys? What was the point of this? What does this mean? Then, after the revelation of the exterminations, we get the scene between Sarah and Emily where it's spelled out pretty clearly that what Emily believed in, what she was taught that Heaven represented, was a lie. It's not about being benevolent. It's not about seeing the best outcome for mortal souls. It's about maintaining the system that keeps Sarah and the rulers of Heaven stable in power. What I love so much about this scene is when Sarah warns Emily that she might fall because it's such obvious setup. It establishes this tension that Emily is going to have to make a choice. She's got to either follow through with what she believes in and lose her home, family, status, power, stability, arguably her identity, or she needs to sign on to allow the oppression and genocide of human souls, something that goes against how she defines herself to maintain her current position, connections, and authority. The ending of season 1 set up such a good potential arc for Emily. Sarah's insistence that there is nothing to be done to enact any meaningful change is proven false with the ascension of Pensius. Emily has every reason now to fully commit to enacting systemic change because even if she loses everything, she has living, breathing proof that what she believes in is not just an overly optimistic fairy tale. Now, season 2, Emily is rough. Boy, howdy, is she rough. But the crux of my personal disappointment with how her character turned out is summed up in this song, like everything else. The season is basically over. The tale is told. Emily's arc, which I don't even want to talk about, is getting its final blow. Here she steps up and begins to initiate the bubble. And when she's doing this, she is here because Sarah gave her permission, and she is still essentially one of the rulers of Heaven. Emily in season 2 doesn't fall. She doesn't lose her sister. Doing what she feels is right isn't difficult because where she was born and raised is designed to crush dissent and force out anyone who goes against the grain. Oh, hi, Lucifer. Turns out all that needed to happen was evidence he presented that enacting total genocide wasn't the most effective path. Now you might be saying, well, Rocco, what's wrong with the redemption arc for Sarah or the powers of Heaven? Well, I'll tell you what's wrong. They committed genocide. Yes, the speaker of God's advice is correct. When you mess up, all you can do is press forward and do your best for the future. But people, systems who've committed genocide aren't just making a mistake. Genocide is by its own definition the most heinous crime we humans are capable of. There is a reason why we have so many systems in place designed to, hypothetically, prevent it. If you look at any genocide committed in the past 100 years, it wasn't committed because people in power genuinely felt they had no choice. It was because they had been radicalized and lost any facet of their humanity beyond short-sighted hatred and political expediency. Genocide is the supreme crime, and the people who commit it are not like how Sarah or Heaven as a whole is presented in this season. They are never misguided, but ultimately good people who just need better advice or be presented with a more effective alternative. They know what they are doing, and they are responsible for the blood on their hands. Also, genocide is never committed by a select few. It is an action committed by a system/broader society. To commit genocide, there needs to be a set-up system. This is why the excuse made by the German people, for example, during World War II, or any other other society who have been complicit in genocide of, well, we just didn't know, is BS. They were at best willfully ignorant and at worst actively turning in people to be sent to their deaths. You're seriously telling me that no one in heaven noticed the massive freaking army of murderous angels departing yearly? You see, that's a problem with season 1 and 2. The problems go way back. Sarah knew what she was doing with the exterminations, and she stood aside and let those atrocities be carried out anyway. Even once the truth of the exterminations is let out, again, something that should not have been possible to keep secret from the rest of heaven, but fine! Nobody moves to stop Adam or the Exorcist. Probably because, like Sarah, or Emily, they fear falling from their comfy positions and lack conviction. They don't want to lose what they value for something they don't even know is right, because they are indoctrinated into an ideology that discourages humanizing sinners and questioning the status quo. All of this put together, there is a fundamental truth. Doing what is right is not always easy. Heaven in Hazbin is a fundamentally rotten system. Sarah should not be in charge. That much is clear. Were it not for God's voice herself descending and telling her to chill the F out, she would have continued to hold that genocide was the way forward because she didn't want to admit she was wrong. And also because she's an objectively evil being, but I guess she's getting a redemption arc. This is why Emily in the scene is the nail in her character's coffin thematically. Because in the act of resisting, of going against the grain of a system which is simultaneously her home and mortal enemy of her ideals, she has lost nothing. She has descended to hell not because she was willing to give up everything for what she knew was right, but because her big sis, who ordered a genocide, by the way, finally saw sense. If only the countless monsters in our own world could do that. That Emily still wears her halo, her crown, a symbol that she is still effectively the princess of heaven, is a thematic travesty. What do we have to learn from this? That if we are in situations where our loved ones, our comfortable positions, are fundamentally associated with unspeakable evil, we should just keep doing our best while remaining in those positions and relationships, because ultimately the system and those people will fix themselves without any considerable change to the status quo? No! I hope I have already made it clear that that is not how change works. Doing what is right isn't as simple as sitting back and letting problems resolve themselves, and those who have power can never be trusted to give up a single inch of it, unless there are checks placed upon them. Outside of her own guilt and the threat by Vox to attack Heaven, a threat, by the way, that he should absolutely be unable to fulfill, Sarah suffers no consequences for what she did, and eventually just signs on to Emily's perspective because she's been convinced that, genocide and doing nothing aren't the only two options. In the real world, that is an utterly laughable scenario. At its core, this moment where Emily steps up and lends her strength to just the possibility of saving hell is fundamentally hollow. Emily has remained a stagnant character. She has had to sacrifice nothing for her convictions, at least nothing that was set up earlier, and has absolutely nothing to lose by contributing her power to try and save the sinners. Imagine if in season 2, Sarah didn't come around. You know, how most genocidal monsters do. And in the act of standing up for Serpentius, her own beliefs about the fundamental value of mortal souls, and that what Heaven has done/is doing is wrong, Emily loses not only her position in Heaven and falls, but is forced to turn her back on Sarah, her sister. Despite all the evil of which Sarah is guilty, it is still perfectly reasonable to say that to lose Sarah would be crushing for Emily, and to lose her identity as a high angel would be equally catastrophic. Suddenly, this moment, this scene, hits a lot harder, doesn't it? It's a display of not only how Emily truly values life and the convictions of goodness that angels should be the paragons of, but that even though she has lost everything, she is still willing to put herself on the line for what she knows is right. I don't know about you, but doesn't that sound like something that would make for a more dynamic character arc and something we can truly learn from and apply to action in the real world? It would be so inspiring to have Emily be this radiant paragon, a demonstration that no matter how much doubt you have or how much you stand to lose in following through, doing what you know is right is worthwhile, because even after losing all that you once thought you needed, you can rebuild your life with people who truly reflect your values and make meaningful change in the world. You can set aside hypocrisy and violence, nihilism and guilt, and be true to yourself, and the world around you can be changed in small and maybe even big ways. Or you could get a little hurt while treating the symptom and not the cause of great destruction, while the threat we need to deal with to stop the slaughter is right over there, and then help put a bubble around an exploding angel cannon before getting a hug from your genocidal sister and ultimately sacrificing nothing in pursuit of your own ideals. I guess that works too. Achoo.